Today's daf is daf Ayin Hey, but we still have something to finish up here on Ayin Dalid Amud Beis, and that is a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Iboilahu. Let's see where it is. We're counting from the bottom of Ayin Dalid Amud Beis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 8 lines up from the bottom. Iboilahu. Mao limnos bo rishon v'sheni. So we're talking about the fact that the fetus contracted tumah because the mother, after the shechita, came in contact with something tameh. And now the question is, what's the level of tumah contracted by the fetus insofar as the fetus is in its mother's womb? Rabbi Yochanan monim bo rishon v'sheni. We have a general principle that a rishon becomes, a rishon transfers contamination down to a sheni. So therefore, since the mother is a rishon, therefore the vlad, the fetus, is a sheni. Reb Shimon Lakish Omer ein monim bo rishon v'sheni. Reb Shimon Lakish says that the status of the fetus is identical to that of its mother. And just like the mother's a rishon, the fetus is a rishon. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan sees the mother and the fetus as two separate entities, and therefore the fetus becomes a sheni, whereas Reish Lakish sees the fetus as the same entity, meaning part and parcel of the mother, what we call chad gufa. It's like one body. And Reish Lakish illuminates this by saying, Nase ke'egos hamiskashkesh b'klipaso. There's a klipa, a covering over the walnut, and if tumah comes in contact with the walnut, meaning with the shell of the walnut, then automatically the walnut itself inside becomes tameh. That's called the shomer lepri kipri, which is a sugya Masechta Brachas and elsewhere. And therefore, the mother vis-a-vis the fetus, according to Reish Lakish, is like a shomer on the fetus. And therefore, the fetus is considered tameh in the same identical tumah as the mother. Esvei Reish ben Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish is going to ask a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. From the Mishnah back on Daf Ayin Beis, we had the case of an ubar that extended its foreleg beyond the womb of its mother. Then the mother was slaughtered, and the shechita would be matir the mother for achila, but as far as the extended leg is concerned, it's mitar midei nevela. Habasar maga nevela divrei Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, the status of that leg that was extended is that of nevela because it's aver minachai, and now since that leg has contact with the mother, the flesh. I shouldn't say the mother because that's confusing. I mean the flesh of the fetus itself. Therefore, the fetus has contact with an avela. Chachamim Omer, they disagree and they hold maga treifa shchuta, meaning the shchita of the mother is not only relevant to the fetus, although the shchita of the mother could not be matir the limb that extended beyond the womb, that leg of the fetus, because that's treifa, that's chutz l'mechitzaso. But nevertheless, it's mitar midei nevela. But there is maga with a treifa, and that has to do with mukdashim and exera d'rabbanan. In any event, what comes out is that everyone agrees, whether it's Rabbi Meir or the Chachamim, that there is some sort of transfer of Tuma through the Maga. Bishleim L'Didi says Reish Lakish, it makes sense going to be the Aminachad Gufa, who I hold that the fetus and its mother are considered one body. Hainu de iskasher bidama de ima. I understand that the fetus is going to contract tuma because of its contact with the extended limb, which according to Reb Meir is Aver Menachai. And the reason why the fetus, the flesh of the fetus is tamei, is because although Ochlin could not be Makabal Tumah without a machshirin, but there's a machshirin of the blood of the shechita of the mother. And the blood of the shechita of the mother now is machshir, even the fetus. And the reason for that is because, says Reish Lakish, it's chad gufa, el didach, but according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, who hold that it's trey gufe, b'mayis kasha, how could the blood of the mother be a machshir for the fetus? Amalei, so Rabbi Yochanan responds, b'shchita u'kerab Shimon. Rab Shimon is of the opinion that with regard to shchita, you don't need a machshir. The shchita itself functions as a machshir. And therefore, according to Rab Shimon, even if, let's say, there was no dam whatsoever, and it was what's called yabeshta, it would be dry, but nevertheless, you don't need hechsher for that animal to be makabel tumah because shchita itself is a substitute machshir. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Now Rabbi Yochanan challenges Reish Lakish from a brisa. The brisa says that if, let's say, you have a fetus that reached all 9 months in its mother's womb, it's a full-term fetus, and it's alive and well, and you took it out of the mother, and it's fully grown, and of a benar hukshar, if you take this fully grown fetus that's now walking on 4 feet, and you bring it into a river, and the river now, as Mayim, is one of the Shiva Mashkim, one of the Shiva Machshirim. Holach, if now that animal is taken into a Beis HaKvaros, Nitma became Tomei. And why? Because Tumas Ochlin has now a machshir through the water of the river. Bishleim L'Didi says Rabbi Yochanan, Damina Trei Gufin Ninu I. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the fetus and its mother are two different gufim. Is Mishum Hachi Hukshar in Lo Hukshar. Now I understand why the fetus needs the mayim as a precondition to be Makabal Tumah, because it cannot be Makabal Tumah through the machshir, the dam of the mother, because the mother and the fetus are two separate entities. El Didach, but according to you, Reish Lakish, the Amr that you hold chad gufahu ha'is kasher b'domadimi. Why do I need to take the animal through the water of the river in order to be machshir to become tumah? The dam of the mother should be machshir l'kabel tumah. Now we begin today's daf ayin hey, and the Gemara answers this Reish Lakish's defense that b'shchita yabeshta, that we're talking about a shchita without blood. If it's a shchita without blood, then the fetus has no machshir of a liquid so that it can be makabel tumah, and therefore it's only going to be makabel tumah if you take it into the river and it gets contacted by water. And to look Reb Shimon, this is against Reb Shimon, who holds that even in a case of shchita yabeshta, you don't need any liquid, any machshir, because the shchita itself is machshir even without any other machshirin. And then the Gemara says the following: Man Tana of our Benar Hukshar, Holach L'Beis HaKvaros Nitma. Which is the Tana who holds that if the fetus reached 9 months and then it was born, then in order to be machshir for Makabel Tumah, you have to take it into the river. And then from the river it enters into the graveyard, and then it becomes Tameh. Now, what's going on over here? The problem here is that the fetus is alive. We have a principle, we'll see that one Tana disagrees with this principle, that a live being is not makabel tuma. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it's Rabbi Yossi Aglili who holds that even a live being is makabel tuma. Tisanya, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Shim ben Elazar, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, metame tumas ochlin v'tzarech hechsher. So now we're talking about something called a ben pekua, which was that fetus in its mother's womb that reached 9 months and then it was born, and it's walking on all 4 feet. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that even though it's alive, nevertheless, if it was mukhshal kabel tuma, meaning if it had been, let's say, dipped into water and it went through the river, then it's makabel tuma. As long as the being is still alive, it cannot be makabel tuma. Kol shuchai ein makabel tumas ochlin. There's no tumas ochlin. So it comes out that although the Chachamim of Rabbi Yossi Aglili agree that the ben pekua is mutter without shechita, and that's the shita of the Chacham of HaMishnah. However, the ben pekua is not an ochel. Why? It's not an ochel because it's alive, and once it's physically alive, it's immune to kabbalas tumah. But Rabbi Yossi Aglili disagrees with the Chachamim, and he takes the Lone Ranger position that even a live being like this ben pekua is still makabel tuma, as long as it's an ochel, meaning it's fit to be eaten without shechita, because it doesn't require shechita, because that's shita chacham. The ben pekua does not require shechita, and therefore the brisa that says that the ben pekua that's walking on all fours and goes through mayim and then goes into the graveyard is makabel tumas ochlin. That's a reflection that has to be attributed to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that even a live being could be makabel tumah. But the Chachamim disagree, and they hold kol shu chai eina mitami tumas ochlin. And therefore, even though you took the ben pekua into water, it's not makabel tumah. The Azda Rabbi Yochanan Tamei. And now we're going to try to prove that Rabbi Yochanan is consistent with another statement that he made, another analysis of Rabbi Yochanan. Tiyom Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yossi Aglilu Beis Shammai Amru Davar Echad. Okay. Now what we're talking about is dogim. We're talking about fish. And the question is, at what point is a dog makabel tuma, meaning tumas ochel? As long as it's in the sea, it's not makabel tumah. But when you take it out of the sea, at what point is it makabel tumah? And on that we have a three-way machlokes in a Mishnah in Masechta Uktzin, in the third parak of Uktzin. It's going to be a machlokes between Beit Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Akiva. And let's just put down on record that according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yossi Aglili should be identified with the shita of Beit Shammai. Okay, so now the Gemara wants to say, who is this Beit Shammai? What shita does he reflect? As far as Rabbi Yossi Aglili Had Hamar, we know that Rabbi Yossi Aglili said that a ben pekua is makabel tumas ochlin, even though it's alive. If there was a hechshel kabel tuma, and Beit Shammai disnan dogim emasai makabel tuma. At what point is a fish considered an ochel, and therefore it's makabel tuma? And here we have a three-way machlokas. Beit Shammai omrim mishiatsudu. As soon as you take it out of the water and it's tzad, meaning you fished it out, you caught it, it's makabel tuma, even though it's alive. And that's where Rabbi Yochanan is going to identify Beit Shammai and Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that even a being that's alive is still makabel tumas ochel. Beis Hillel, Omer Misha Musu, Beis Hillel hold the fish is only makabel tumah after it dies, because as long as it's alive, we have the principle of kol shuchayim mitami tumas ochel. Rabbi Akiva Omer Misha she'ein yicholin lichyos. At some point, the fish can no longer live, meaning it got to the point where it's going to die. And even if you throw it back into the water, it's gone, it's dead. And once again, let's reemphasize that Rabbi Yossi HaGlili and Beit Shammai are going with one shita, namely that even a being that's still alive is mitami tumas ochl, like the case of the fish of Beit Shammai and the case of the Ben Pekua of Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. My Beinayu. So on these two words, my Beinayu, we have machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos. So let's learn the Gemara according to Rashi. Rashi is going to interpret that the Gemara, the Makshon who asks my Beinayu, is identifying Beis Hill and Rabbi Akiva. Because if you notice, Beis Hill says Mishia Musu, and Rabbi Akiva says Enichom Lichios. They can't live. If they can't live, then they die. So what's the difference between Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva? That's Rashi's Shita. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan dag mikartea ika beinayu. The word mikartea, Rashi says, means mefarper. In other words, the fish is still flopping around. You've seen it. You take a fish out of the water and it's still flopping around. So Beis Hill is going to say that it's already considered. No, I'm sorry. Rabbi Akiva is going to say that it's already considered like it's dead. Ena yachol lichios. It's out of the water and it's flopping around. Beis Hill, on the other hand, say, well, no, it's still alive. Therefore, it's not makabel tumah if it's still alive. But Rabbi Akiva says it's got to the point where it's not able to survive, even if you throw it back into the water. And why is that? Because it's flopping around, but that's just some sort of pirkus. That's not real life force. So it has no vitality to it. So now the nafkamina between Beis Shammai, I'm sorry, Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva is going to be a dag ha-mikartea, which means it's flopping around. And whether or not it's makabel tumah, if let's say a sheretz falls on this fish, according to Beis Hillel, it's not makabel tumah until it dies, and it's not dead yet. Rabbi Akiva holds it's makabel tumah. Why? Because it's going to die. Even if you throw it back into the water, it's going to die. Okay, all that is according to Rashi. Tosfos doesn't like it. Tosfos doesn't think that my Beinai, the Gemara, identified Beis Hill and Rabbi Akiva, that they're obviously saying two different things. Whereas Beis Hill are talking about Mishia Musu, it means the fish died. Rabbi Akiva is talking about Eino Yochel Lichios. So obviously, Rabbi Akiva is not saying the same thing as Beis Hillel, and therefore the Gemara would not have asked this question, what's the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Beis Hillel? But rather, says Tosfos, my Beinai, the Gemara is asking, what's the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Beit Shammai? Because Beit Shammai holds that even though the fish is not dead, it was taken out of the water, sheyatsudu, it's already considered like it's dead as far as being makabel tumas ochlin. And that's exactly what Rabbi Akiva says, because Rabbi Akiva says, Eino yochel lichios, you took it out of the water. So according to both Beis Shammai and Rabbi Akiva, if you take it out of the water, then it's makabel tumah. So what's the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Beit Shammai? The Gemara answers, dag mikartea ika beinayu. And now Tosfos reinterprets the word mikartea, not like Rashi that it's thrashing around, but rather Tosfos says mikartea means that in between its fins, it turns into like the Gemara compares it to like silver coins, meaning at that point, Rabbi Akiva says that, and this is based on the Gemara in Shabbos, that even if you throw it back into the water, it would not survive. So according to Beit Shammai, as soon as you take it out of the water, it's already makabel tumah. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's not makabel tumah until it gets that point where it has these. Let me just see what the language of Tosfos is, just to remind myself. Um, oh, Tosfos says that Mekarteh is lashon koach v'chius, and he quotes the Aruch. So again, this is a point in the like the death process of the fish, where the fish loses its vitality, and already, if you throw it back into the water, it would not survive, and that's Rabbi Akiva who holds at that point it's mekabel tumas ochlin. Whereas Beit Shammai say even before that, when you take it out of the water, it's already mekabel tumas ochlin. Boy, Rav Chisda has a suffix, noldu b'dogim simoni treifa mau. Is there a concept of treifa with regard to a fish, that the fish becomes also bachil b'din treifa? Now, Rashi seems to learn that Rav Chisda's suffix is according to Rabbi Akiva, meaning this is going back to the question of being makabel tumah. So Rabbi Akiva said that the fish, once it reaches the stage where you cannot save the fish, and even if you throw it back into water, it will die. What about if it had simone treifa? Let's say it has a hole in its meyayim. So therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva's logic, it should be makabel tumah. The Gemara says, referring back to the previous parak, we had a machlokus in the previous parak, whether treif is chaya or eno chaya, meaning if something is treif, it means it won't survive. Tiboy lemandi omer treifa chaya, tiboy lemandi omer treifa eno chaya. Tiboy lemandi omer treifa chaya, even if you hold that a treifa could survive, behema hu de nofesh chiyusa, avol dogim de lo nofesh chiyusa lo. Maybe a behema that has a very strong vitality can survive even though it's a treifa, even though it has a hole in its intestines. But dogim, which have a very limited vitality, a koach chius, they will die for sure after they become treifa, when they have a hole in their intestines. And therefore, Rabbi Kiva would say it's makabel tumah. O dilma, afilu madiyama treifa ena chaya. Even if I hold the treifa is going to die, the Gemara now presents a very abstract conceptual definition that the whole concept of treifa is inapplicable to fish, because fish don't require shchita. You take a fish out of the water and you can eat the fish. There's no need for shchita. The whole concept of treifa means the impossibility of shchita. Right? Treifa is antithetical to shchita, but in case of fish where there is no shchita, therefore there's no treifa. Take hitila nefel. Okay, now we're talking about a nefel. And the question is, at what point do we say that the nefel, right, a miscarriage, is considered yilud, it's considered a vlad, and it's born, and then afkamin is l'gabi chelev, whether you have kares for eating the chelev of this vlad, of this miscarried fetus. Rabbi Yochanan Omer chelbo kechelev behema. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the chelev of this nefel has the identical status to the chelev of behema, meaning the fetus is called a behema, and therefore its chelev generates an isukores. If you eat it, Reish Lakish Omar, chelbo kechelev chaya, and the chelev of a chaya does not generate kores. And the Gemara now analyzes this machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan chelbo kechelev behema vira garin. Once the fetus is born, that's called avira gorem, then it's considered a behema. Now that's a chiddush because it doesn't reach full term. It never reached the full 9 months. But nevertheless, the birth itself gives it the status of a behema and generates an isa kores for its chelev like a behema. It's not enough to tell me that it was born and it reached the air space of this earth, but we need kol chadashav. We need that it has all the 9 months, and then it could be considered a behema. Now the Gemara offers another alternative transmission of the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish. He could the Amri some say. Kol heichad kol chadashav lav klumhu. Even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that unless it reaches a full term of 9 months, it's not considered behema, even if it was born into the air space. Kipli yuwatzim machlokshim Rabbi Yochanan Lakish. Heichad hoshit yado lemei behema. A person took his hand and extended it into the womb of the animal, the mother. V'tolash chelev shel ben tishachai, and now the fetus reached its full 9-month term, and he ripped out the chelev of the ben tisha. V'yochal, and he ate it. Rabbi Yochanan amar chelbo kechelev behema. Why? Because even though it wasn't born yet, and it didn't reach the airspace, but nevertheless it reached 9 full months, therefore it's a behema. Because chadashim garmi, all we need is one factor, one element in order to generate the shem behema, and the isakaris of chelev, and that's chadashim, that if reached its full 9 months. We need 2 things. There are 2 conditions in generating a shem behema. We need, number 1, that it be born, and number 2, that it's kol chadashav. So although here in this case you have one of those 2 conditions have met, meaning it had a full 9 months, but it wasn't born. And if it wasn't born because he put his hand and ripped off a piece of chelev, then that chelev is like chelev of chaya. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Ma chelev, we have a brisa that says Ushtei kloyos amuros bi osham mutza mechlal shlil. Okay, now we get to Korban Asham, and the Torah says in the parsha of Korban Asham, you have to take the chelev and the kloyos, and you have to burn those on the mizbeach. It requires haktoras, what we call haktoras a murim of an asham. Now, there's no need for the Torah to tell me that the chelev and the shtei kloyos of an asham have to be burnt on the mizbeach. We could derive that, as we'll soon see in the Kavachom, from Shlomin. So once the Torah explicated that in Shlomin, the chelev and shtei kloyos are burnt on the mizbeach, I know that ipso facto will apply also to chelev, so to asham. So why did the Torah in the case of asham nevertheless go out of its way to point out that you take the chelev and the kloyos and you burn it on the mizbeach in order to teach me that we only take it from the animal itself, the asham itself, but not from the shlil. Shlil is the fetus. And the brisa goes on to say that becomes a binyanav to teach me that anything that's taken from the shlil of any carbon, lav dafka asham, is not to be burnt on the mizbeach. Bishlei says Rabbi Yochanan, it makes sense according to me, that I hold that a fetus is considered like a behemoth as long as it reaches chadashim, its full term of 9 months. Hainu ditzur krolim ute. I need to exclude the chelev of a fetus from haktar gabi mizbeach, because I would say the fetus is born. And since the fetus is born, then its chelev would, again, even though it didn't come out of its mother's womb, but it reached 9 months, I would say the chelev has the same status of any chelev, and therefore the chelev of the fetus should be burnt on the mizbeach. And therefore I need this whole mute that we derive from the fact that the Torah went out of its way to repeat chelev ukloyos in the case of Osher. But according to Yeresh Lakish, that you hold that you need two conditions in order for the fetus to be considered a behemoth and to prohibit its chelev. You need number one, kol chadash, but you also need that it's born. Amai itzrich. I mean, we're talking about a fetus that was not born. And if the fetus was not born, then it's not a behemoth. And if it's not a behemoth, it doesn't have chelev. And therefore, obviously, the chelev is not to be burnt on the mizbeach. Amalei. Says Reish Lakish, how do I know that you need two conditions for the fetus to be considered a vlad, to be considered born? Not only, it's not sufficient only to have kolu chadasha, but I also need the actual leda that has to come out into. I know it from this halacha that the chelev of the shalil, meaning of the shlil, meaning of the fetus, is not burnt on the mizbeach. This is the source from which I derive my halacha. Ika diamri, some say it wasn't Rabbi Yochanan who asked the kasha on Reish Lakish, but rather it was Reish Lakish who asked the kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. Eisvei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. The Brisa says, "Ma chelev ushtei kloyos hamuras b'yashem mutzu michal shlil af kol mutzu michal shlil." Right? So if you have a carbon, a female carbon, and she's pregnant, and the chelev of the fetus is not to be offered on the mizbeach, bishlam according to Reish Lakish. Mishum hachi mi'atorah. Why did the Torah say that you don't bring the chelev of the fetus onto the mizbeach? It's because the fetus is not a behemoth, and it's chelev, it's not chelev. El didach, but according to Reish Lakish, that you hold that even though the fetus was not born yet, but it was kolu chadashav, it's already considered as if it was born. Is likarev. Why would the Torah say that you can't take the chelev from the fetus and burn it on the mizbeach? Amalei mididahavi amachusas man. So Rabbi Yochanan now says that the Torah says, sorry, I don't have the pasuk by heart. Anyway, the pasuk says that you can't bring a carbon until after a full week since its birth, meaning it reaches day 8. So that's called mechusas man. Up until day 8, the animal is too young to be brought on the mizbeach. And therefore, this fetus is no worse than a mechusas man. I mean, it wasn't even born yet. Omer of Ami, Hashochet is a treifo motzah ben tisha. You slaughter a mother who's a treifa. She has, let's say, a puncture in her intestines. And now what do you find inside the mother? You find inside the mother a fetus that reached its 9th month and it's fully alive. And this is talking about the shechita of a treifa, meaning the mother's a treifa, and what impact could it or does it have on the fetus? And now Rav Ami says the following: L'divrei oser matir, l'divrei matir oser. So we're referring now back to a machlok shin Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as far as Ben Pekua. Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah holds that a ben pekua requires its own shechita, and the shechita of the mother is not meaningful for the ubar for this is here in the case of a fetus chai meaning full term fetus of a treifa is matir, meaning Rabbi Meir is going to say go ahead and shech the fetus. The fetus stands on its own, and the shechita of its mother had no impact on the fetus, because that's what Meir's shita, that Mishnah and Ben Pekua requires its own shechita, and therefore go ahead and shecht it, and everything's fine. But L'divrei Amata, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah, and he holds that a Ben Pekua is eaten based on the shechita of its mother, and the shechita of the mother is valid even as far as the Vlad Oser. The shechita itself will not generate a heter. And here, once again, we have machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi's language follows up from the bottom. B'shel oser b'shel treifa the shchita didei lo mahanya be u'b'shchita sa treifa lo mishter. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no shchita on the ben pekua. The only shchita on the ben pekua is the shchita of its mother, but the mother was a treifa, and that shchita is not going to be meaningful. Rava says, I don't understand how you could say such a thing. L'divrei matir nami mutar. Okay, while it's true that according to Rabbi Yehuda, in a case of ben pekua, the shechita of its mother is meaningful for the ben pekua, for the fetus, but the fetus could have its own shechita, and that's called arba simonim achshel rachmana. You could be machshir the ubar in one of two ways, either with the shechita of its mother, those two simonim, or with the shechita of the fetus after it's born with its two simonim. So the four simonim, two of any of which, will be matir. Amar Rav Chizda, Hashochet hatreifa u'matza ba ben tishachai. So again, we're back to the case where the mother was a treifa, and inside the mother's womb we find a fully developed 9-month fetus. The mother herself was a treifa. Is ton shchita v'chayav bizro l'chayayim v'keva v'yabeis tor miltami v'masa.